Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative, members of the body, the public. Thank you for being here. This bill is not about religious freedom. It is all politics. I am an ordained Presbyterian pastor. Prior to my work in the legislature, I served as a chaplain on college campuses. I care deeply about religious freedom. The bill in front of us does not resemble the intent of the federal RFRA. Instead, what this bill does is it weaponizes religious beliefs to justify discrimination. I want to say that again. It weaponizes religious beliefs to justify discrimination and put Iowa in harm's way. We have heard from the LGBTQ community and the harm there, but it doesn't just harm the LGBTQ community. It's the single mom whose landlord evicts her because his religious beliefs that, being an unwed mom is not acceptable. It's the pharmacist who refuses to fill a medical prescription because it's contraception, because it's a mental health medication that they don't believe in their religious commitments. This creates chaos, I want to be very clear, for our law enforcement, and it gives, which is most frightening to me, the judicial system the vast authority, the vast authority to define what is a, quote, real religion. It makes Iowa an unwelcoming place to our workers and our businesses, and as Tim said, it harms our economy. This is a bill that is not about religious freedom. It's a bill that is about politics. Iowans sent us here to put people over politics. I cannot support this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had prepared comments. I'm going to go away from those comments. So last year we had a bill that dealt with the mutilation of children in relations to radical gender ideology. And I read off a list of states that were growing states and a list of states that were not growing. The growing states were almost entirely red states that were pushing back on gender ideology, they were pushing back on DEI, etc. The states that were declining and not growing were the states pushing all those things. So the business community coming and telling us this is going to hurt us, it's not true. It hasn't been happening anywhere else. Florida is the fastest growing state for every metric you can find. And I think that we would all agree that Governor DeSantis in Florida have taken on some pretty strong social conservative issues from the right, and they've been pretty successful. I don't understand that. I think those are talking points that have been proven to not be true. This is literally common sense. It's Constitution 101. I am happy to move it forward.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting. The impact on commerce is definitely a myth, and I have to doubt improve it. That's just a myth. Obviously, I would agree with Representative James in her comments. And it's interesting to note that the original Religious Freedom Restoration Act was enacted by the federal government in 1993. It was introduced by Senator Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, passed unanimously in the House and nearly unanimously in the Senate. I think 3 senators voted against it. It was then signed into law by President Clinton. This legislation was introduced in part due to the infringement on the religious liberty of Native Americans, and in fact returned jurisprudence to the status quo because there had been a court ruling that turned it on its head. And that's really what this does. It returns things to the status quo that existed before there was this Supreme Court ruling against Native Americans. Federal government, 25 states, I believe it is, has RFRA. I think Iowans should be free to live and work according to their faith without fear of being unjustly punished by the government. This legislation guarantees that everyone gets a fair day in court when the government intrudes on their basic freedoms. It does not pick winners and losers. It does not make a determination for a court, but rather creates a kind of balancing test for courts to use. Opponents of this legislation can only list hypothetical situations because in federal law and in numerous states where this has been adopted, this legislation has not led to discrimination. In the decades we have lived under religious freedom laws, such as this one, that again returned the status quo to what it had been prior to a particular Supreme Court ruling. I believe these are important protections that should be in Iowa code, and people with deeply held religious beliefs should also be part of inclusion. So with that, I enthusiastically advance this for consideration before the full